Right now on KCCI, Senator Joni Ernst. We talk one-on-one with Iowa's junior senator, her growing concerns about what's unfolding at the southern border, plus the bipartisan legislation she's working on and how it could help Iowans in need of childcare. And you've seen her give daily briefings. This morning, we talk with White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki about the potential executive order President Biden may sign and how the president views the Iowa caucuses. Plus, are we in the clear? Why health experts are concerned about a potential surge in coronavirus cases and their push to get as many people vaccinated as possible. Close Up starts right now.
This is Iowa's news leader. This is KCCI 8 News Close Up.
Good morning and thank you for joining us. I'm Scott Carpenter. Well, lawmakers from both parties spent some time at the southern border this past week. Right now, more than 17,000 unaccompanied children are in U.S. custody. KCCI chief political reporter Cynthia Fodor spoke one-on-one with Senator Joni Ernst about what's happening to our south. She also talked about gun control and the possibility of the Senate getting rid of the filibuster.
And wanted to get your thoughts. You know, we're hearing so much about the border crisis right now. All these children flooding into the United States. I know a number of senators have gone down there. Have you gone down? Do you plan to? And what do you think needs to be done?
Yes, I have visited the border, but it was during the Trump administration because we had so many people that were coming to the border. So President Trump did put a number of measures in place. Those have been rolled back now by the Biden administration. So once again, we see this, not only what I consider a humanitarian crisis at the border, but we also have a national security crisis at the border. When we typically think of those immigrants that are flooding across the border, we typically think of those that are coming into the country for a better life. But we have to understand and realize that there are many other countries that are sending people across the border, people from Yemen, people from Iran. There are 54 different countries that have sent individuals over the border. We have to be aware of that. But as we look at the situation with the children, this is very, very dangerous for them. They are being trafficked across our border. We have to understand that many of the families that are sending their children, they have handed over their children to very dangerous individuals, oftentimes involved with the drug cartels. They're being paid heavy amounts of money to get these children over the border. So whether they are being trafficked for sex activities, being used for whatever very bad purposes, it is a very dangerous journey for these children. And so if we can stop that, make sure that they are staying in their home countries and applying for asylum in those home countries, the better off these children will be.
And what can you, as a Republican senator, and I saw Senator Grassley also spoke on the floor this week about this, do to persuade the Biden administration that something has to change here?
Yes, we continue to speak out about this, continue to work with folks through the Department of Homeland Security, working with our Border Patrol agents, offering assistance where we can. But certainly the administration is finally acknowledging that this is a crisis. They have long said it's just a challenge. Well, now they are finally stating it is a crisis. And we see some of what President Trump had put into place now being reinstituted in the Biden administration. So the stay in Mexico policy that had been put in place by President Trump, it had been undone by the Biden administration. Now the Biden administration is putting that back into place with the Mexican government. So, President Trump had some good policies when it came to illegal immigration into the United States. Biden is starting to slowly re-implement those plans, and we hope that does slow down the stream of people coming to our border. It is, again, a very dangerous trek that they are engaging on, whether you're an adult, but especially if you're a child.
And there's more talk this week of Democrats ending the Senate filibuster. Donald Trump said this would be catastrophic for the Republican Party. How worried are you that would actually happen?
I am extremely worried about this. And I have stated time and time again that our system of government, we have a Senate and we have a House. And what we see Senate Democrats trying to do is turn the Senate into another House where it is just a simple majority where legislation can pass. And that does not protect the minority party. Republicans resisted this. I just need to remind everybody, Republicans resisted getting rid of the filibuster, even under extraordinary pressure from President Donald Trump. Now we see and understand why that was important. Having a simple majority to pass major pieces of legislation with no bipartisan support is not the best way to represent the United States of America. There are many things that could happen if the filibuster goes away. And these are not things that would help us across the United States. We would see a federalization of our election system, which is a right that's reserved for our states. We would see a $15 an hour minimum wage, which is something that probably would not be working in Iowa. We would lose a significant number of jobs. Our small businesses would close. So many things that could happen. DC statehood, where you have influence peddlers now that have become their own state. A lot of things could happen. And we just need to ensure that we continue working in a bipartisan manner. That doesn't happen when you get rid of the filibuster.
Gun control laws. President Biden is talking about putting those through either by executive order or new legislation. Your thoughts?
Yes, and this is a very, very tough issue and one that we really need to have some solid debate on. We have done this in the past. So I'm absolutely willing to take a look at whatever bills might come forward. But bottom line is that we do have our Second Amendment rights. We have a constitutional rights. We don't want to see those infringed. But again, we want to make sure that we are safeguarding our communities and enforcing the gun laws that are on the books. Bottom line, laws need to be enforced. So we'll continue working through this issue. Again, it is a very tough issue, but it will take up a significant amount of our time as we move forward.
Do you think laws need to be changed?
Well, again, we have a lot of gun laws on the books. And oftentimes when I'm asking people, what would you like to see changed when it comes to gun laws? I'll have an Iowa constituent that will propose this or that or the other. And then I point out to them, do you realize that's already a law?
So you think we need more enforcement of the laws already here?
Absolutely. And I hope that people would be willing to take a look and understand that so many things they are proposing, just Joe citizen on the street, it's already in law. It's already in code. We need to make sure that our codes are enforced, and hopefully then we can avoid additional tragic situations. So we just need to go back, understand what is already in law, and then sort through any additional proposals.
Up next, access to child care, the new bipartisan piece of legislation that Senator Ernst is working on. Close Up, we'll be right back.
They say that imitation is a sincere
Welcome back to Close Up. KCCI's Cynthia Fodor wraps up her conversation with Senator Joni Ernst about a new piece of legislation that she's working on.
This week you introduced bills relating to child care called the Access Act. How will those help Iowa families?
Yes, I have a couple of bills that are being introduced. And one, of course, is being introduced with Congresswoman Ashley Hinson, which would allow us to expand access to child care for communities and for public-private partnerships and grants through the Commerce Department. It is very important that we come together in communities and find solutions for child care, and this is one way that will help with that. Another bill that I have is bipartisan. I've introduced in the Senate with Senator Maggie Hassan of New Hampshire, and that would allow for funds to be set aside by families for dependent care or for child care expenses. So a couple different ways we're approaching the issue. This has been a long time issue that I have worked on even pre-COVID, and we're hoping to find some solid solutions for access to child care.
And this is something you would think would get bipartisan support. Does it seem to have it?
Yes, absolutely. There are so many of us on both sides of the aisle that have been working on childcare and how we promote childcare, even in the most rural areas. Some of my partners in the United States Senate have been Amy Klobuchar of Minnesota, Jackie Rosen of Nevada, certainly Maggie Hassan in New Hampshire. Those are some of my go-tos when we're working on childcare issues, but it is a bipartisan issue with bipartisan solutions.
And how would the part of it with the grants and the public-private partnership work?
Yes, that would go through the Department of Commerce. And then, of course, communities could work on developing public-private partnerships. And then those partnerships would have access to grants through the federal government. So, for example, I visited a project that is just getting off the ground in Glidden, Iowa. It's the Little Wildcats daycare facility. And that would be a great opportunity for them because they do have a number of partners on that project. And so they could, once this bill is completed and hopefully signed into law, they could then apply to the Department of Commerce and receive a federal grant to help build and maintain that facility.
So we could see more child care facilities opening under something like that, which, I mean, explain the need right now with COVID. So many moms have, I guess, decided to stay at home
Yes.
now that they've been working from home where their children are at home.
Yes, and this is becoming an issue, and it was prior to COVID. Iowa has a number of areas that are considered childcare deserts, but the fact that now we have COVID has really exacerbated that because a lot of children have been staying home through the pandemic, so moms have had to leave the workforce. That means that childcare centers, their doors are closing. They haven't been able to stay open. So we just have this cycle right now that is very detrimental to our working families. We need to make sure we're opening those doors again, that we are providing for childcare, even in the most remote areas of Iowa. And these public-private partnerships are exactly the way to do it. Really get the community engaged, but then we can also provide a little support coming from the federal government.
Up next, one-on-one with White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki and the potential new executive order we could see signed by President Biden.
My part-time service in the Army National
Welcome back to Close Up. Her job is to deliver President Biden's message to the American people. This morning, KCCI chief political reporter Cynthia Fodor speaks with White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki about how to get the economy moving again and how to make sure that everyone who wants one gets a vaccine.
The president announcing yesterday that he's doubling his goals for vaccinations to 200 million shots in the first 100 days. Is that realistic?
It's going to be hard, but we felt it was important to set goals for the American public to try to meet them, and we're working toward it. And a big part of that is increasing the number of supply, and we've already done a lot in that regard. We're going to have enough supply from the federal government to get out to states and through our pharmacy program and mass vaccination program to vaccinate every adult American by the end of May, or to have enough supply by that point in time. It's also about vaccinators, so people who can do these vaccines, put the shots in arms. So that's why we are investing in community health centers, but also expanding the type of people and medical professionals who can do the vaccination, and then vaccination sites. So we want to make it as easy as possible and as seamless as possible for people to get the vaccine. It's going to take an increase in all of these areas, and that's where we're investing.
And this investment, the president is hoping will lead to boosting the economy and economic growth. And there's already been talk that you're seeing signs of that.
We are seeing some signs of that in recent economic data, although we don't look at 1 month as an indication. But what he's going to be introducing next week is part of his Build Back Better agenda. Part of that will be a big investment in infrastructure around the country. I think we can all agree our roads, our railways, our bridges all need to be upgraded. It's also a way to create jobs across the country, clean energy jobs across the country. So the first package here, the American Rescue Plan, was really about boosting, getting the pandemic under control, giving people a bridge through this period of time. But the package he's going to announce next week is going to build on that and be more about jobs, investing in our communities.
Yesterday at the press conference, the president was asked about re-election or whether he'll be running in 2024. Yeah. When you heard that, what went through your mind? Do you think it's too early to start talking about the next election?
Yes, and I think that probably went through his mind as well, because we're just over 2 months in and he's focused on delivering on what the American people elected him to do. But he was asked a direct question, and he certainly has every intention of running for re-election, so he answered it directly.
And do you have any idea, you know, there's a lot of talk out here. You've obviously spent some time out here working on campaigns. What does the president think about the Iowa caucuses? We're waiting to hear how this is going to all turn out.
Well, the president has a great deal of love and affection for the people of Iowa and the role they've played in the process. But we know there's a process that will play out through the DNC and the political party, and we'll let that process play out. So I don't have any new points of view from him to report on today.
So gun control, hot topic right now. Do you think President Biden will sign an executive order?
I do. He's having his team review what executive order options there are. Now, it's important to remember that he led the effort to put in place nearly 24 executive actions during the Obama-Biden administration when bipartisan legislation on gun safety reforms failed in Congress. So there's a lot that's already been done legally through executive action. So he's seeing what else is possible, what else can be done, and he certainly is eager to do that.
But first, he will try the legislation route.
He'll be working on them on parallel paths. There's 2 pieces of legislation that would expand background checks that have worked their way through the House. There's also legislation that's been introduced to ban assault weapons, something that he certainly supports. He helped pass the first assault weapons ban back in the 90s. And he will definitely advocate for those pieces of legislation as president. But he also will look for what executive actions and what levers he has at his disposal through executive orders.
Up next, the state of the pandemic in Iowa. We talk with one of Iowa's leading infectious disease experts about why he's cautiously optimistic about the future.
Over 10 years ago.
Welcome back to Close Up. More and more Iowans continue to receive the coronavirus vaccine. Despite that good news, health leaders are urging caution. Last week, I had the chance to speak with Dr. Ravi Vamiri, who told me now is not the time to let our guard down.
What are the current trends you're seeing with COVID-19 positivity rate and hospitalizations? I know the metrics are pretty flat right now. I'm not seeing any spikes. Is there anything you're throwing caution to the wind about, or are you pleased with the way the metrics are right now?
Yeah. So the one metric that we tend to follow pretty closely here is the Polk County 7-day running average of daily new cases per 100,000 population. And for Polk County, it's 18.6. And in the way we look at things, that's considered in the orange zone. So 25 and above is red, which means uncontrolled spread. And 10 to 24 is considered orange, which means accelerated spread. So we're 18.6. Recently, we were as low as 14, and we were really encouraged when we were at 14. But now, as of this morning, we're 18.6. Iowa as a whole is actually doing slightly better at 13.2. But, you know, we're a bigger metro area, so we tend to lag behind some of the rural counties. So compared to where we were in November and December, obviously we're very happy, both in the level of community transmission that we're seeing and in the hospitalizations especially. So, you know, being in the hospital every day, seeing all kinds of patients, I can tell you that I can go for a day or two now without seeing a single COVID-19 patient on my list, which typically means, I mean, we still have them in the hospital, but they're not necessarily sick enough for me to see. And so that's gratifying, you know, after spending a year slogging through and seeing all these patients with COVID and all the tragedies that befell them, it's kind of gratifying to see that I can go 2 or 3 days and not see a single one. And so that part of it we're very happy with. But the part that still concerns us and bothers us is this level of community transmission. We'd love to see us in the yellow or even the green zone. Yellow means 9 or less active new cases per 100,000 population, and green means less than 1. That would be ideal. The other thing that's been encouraging to see is, of course, is our vaccinations. As a country, you know, we've crossed 100 million shots in arms. We're doing about 2.5 million shots in arms per day. And as of this morning, apparently in Iowa, we've given over 1.3 million shots, have gotten at least one shot, and about 16.3% of the population have gotten at least 2 shots. So that's gratifying. What's a bit worrying is something called the running average of daily new cases for the nation as a whole. It has plateaued stubbornly anywhere from 45 to 50,000, sometimes 55,000 new cases per day. That is on that stubborn plateau. We'd like to see that plummet to less than 10,000 per day. We would all feel a lot safer and a lot better if that were to happen.
Thank you for joining us for KCCI 8 News Close Up. We will see you back here next Sunday.